Deandre Ayton is a player who's faced a ton of criticism and scrutiny over the course of his career, ever since his days in Phoenix, because he's inactive, there's a lot of lack of effort, he's not super aggressive, a lot of criticisms like that. People also say he's not physical or aggressive enough because he has this monster physical frame and he doesn't really, put it to work inside the arc. He's not posting guys up, going through their chest as often as people would like. But on the other hand, he still does have some very legitimate skills, some very legitimate physical gifts that allow him to be a good, if not great, center when he's on. To be entirely honest, I hadn't watched a ton of Deandre Ayton prior to the making of this video. So I decided to, after watching a bunch of his recent games, just go through and give my thoughts on how he's being used this season, what I think he could be doing better, what some of my criticisms of him are, what I think some of his strengths are, things like that, with the Lakers being off to this hot start to the season. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Court Vision. Remember to like the video and subscribe if you want to see more stuff like this from me. And without further ado, let's jump right into it. I kind of want to talk about what Ayton is doing offensively this season first, because I feel like that's, more what he's known for is his offensive game rather than anything he does on the defensive end. The biggest thing I've noticed with Ayton this season is he is not super involved in the offense, and that's not necessarily a good nor a bad thing, but he does have the lowest usage of his entire career, only sitting at 16.7% usage. And that means he's just not taking the same volume of shots, not getting the same volume of touches compared to a lot of his previous teams, especially when he's in Portland. The Lakers and coach JJ Redick don't really ask him to do a ton with the ball in his hands at all, and he hasn't really been much of a scorer or a shot creator, but rather much more of like a traditional five-man for this team, acting as a low man a lot of the times, acting as a screener, not being asked to do too much complicated. This has actually allowed him to be very efficient this season. He's generally only taking rim attempts and more like open jumpers. He's still taking some jumpers because that's a big part of Deandre Ayton's game, but a lot more of his shots are assisted and he is more open on those shots. So he's generally having an easier time scoring the ball efficiently. He's currently sitting at 67.5% from the field, 62% from mid-range as of time of recording, which are both really solid numbers, especially for his position. From mid-range, 62% is KD numbers. 83% of his baskets are assisted. So he's getting a lot more open looks basically fed to him, and he's not being asked to create his own shot, basically. Ayton this season, I think, has been fine as a screener and as a roll man. He's not so detrimental in those kinds of actions where he's actively harming his ball handlers, but I don't necessarily think he's such a good screener, being used so creatively that he's creating shots with his screening game like some of these other centers that we see in the league can. Obviously, as a center working next to Luka Doncic, he's going to be used a lot in just, high middle pick and roll, high angle pick and roll, or in these high three-man actions that JJ Redick loves to do, something like a double drag, or these like off-ball screen and handoff actions with Luka Doncic and Jake LaRavia, or whoever they want to use in those actions. I'd imagine it's probably going to be a lot of LeBron when he comes back involved in those with Ayton and Luka. His screens are generally not the strongest screens, not exactly bone-crushing. He's not Steven Adams or anything. It'll be a lot of brush screens or a quick hip bump and go, but they're effective enough up high to get Luka his switch or get him enough room to make a kind of move. So when you're playing with a guy like Luka Doncic, or even, when Luka's off the floor with Austin Reeves, those guys are so skilled with the ball in their hands, you don't have to do too much. You just have to get him that little initial bit of separation to let them cook. And Ayton has been doing that pretty well, so credit to him for that, even if his screens are not, scoring the ball by themselves. Coming out of the pick and roll, he generally kind of just does one of two things. He'll either roll all the way down to the rim, or he'll kind of float around the free throw line for a catch in space. That's something that he does a lot, that a lot of people have maybe criticized him for, but I don't necessarily think is such a bad thing. But he does like to float kind of around the middle of the floor out of these pick and rolls, kind of like an extended short roll almost. When he does roll hard to the rim, he will get all the way down low. He'll either, pseudo kind of Gortat his defender, meaning he'll like screen his defender off as he's rolling for the ball handler to have an easier lane to the basket, something like that. Or he'll roll into space kind of in the dunker spot, and, guys will find him for lobs. Guys will find him for late dump off passes, things like that. Typical big man stuff. But because Ayton is so big and has enough of that strength and physicality with his frame down low, he's very effective in these situations simply because if the ball comes to him down low, there's not really many guys in the league that can stop him from just going up and putting it in the basket. Like I said before, he will float a lot on the short roll or kind of just hover around the middle of the floor, which is to be expected. The midi hunting, floating kind of has been a part of his game for years now, dating back all the way to his earlier years in Phoenix. But this season, I've noticed that he does look to actually pass a good amount out of the short roll. He's not going to be finding these crazy passing angles that you see from some of these other bigs like Hartenstein or whatever. But he is able to find, if he sees two, he's able to find the kick out, find an open shooter, things like that. He's not a super accurate passer, but he's good enough in these situations to keep the ball moving, which I think is really all the Lakers are asking of him. The other thing is he's not really looking to force those mid-range jumpers at all. He's really only taking them when he has plenty of space to take them and he's in a good position to take them. So credit to him for, not trying to force his own game and just letting other guys do the work, keeping the ball moving, playing within the system. As a roll man, he's got about 1.08 points per possession, which is in the middle third of qualifying players, which sounds about right. Watching him on those plays, it's clear that he's not elevating the action by being involved. He's not going to make or break the pick and roll for the team, but he's also never going to necessarily hurt them by being involved. Talking about his off-ball game offensively, or when he's not being used in those screen actions, he's generally fine. That's a word that I keep using to describe him a lot, but it is really just the truth. He is fine in a lot of ways. Again, like I said, he's not usually hurting the offense by being out there, but a lot of times when you're watching him play, he can definitely get forgotten about, watching the Lakers if you're not specifically looking for him and what he's doing. It'll be a lot of sitting in the dunker spot or floating around the middle of the floor if he's not involved as a screener. And the Lakers aren't looking to get him those designed touches, so it is really just a lot of floating and waiting for the ball to come to him. Sometimes if he has the space or a good matchup underneath, he'll try and seal or post underneath the rim. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I mean, it's about what you'd expect from a regular center. Sometimes he's able to just use his size and get a free bucket because he's got a defender on him out of position, and sometimes he isn't able to secure the catch or isn't able to go up for the shot. About what you'd expect. The Lakers will use him a good amount actually off the ball as a screener to free guys up on flare screens or down screens, and he is pretty solidly effective at that specifically. He also does have a good feel kind of for when to cut or roll off of those off-ball screens if he identifies that there's a lane that he can cut into or open space that he can kind of find his way into for a catch down low. He does have a legitimate talent for kind of navigating like that. And to kind of extend on that point, he just has a great feel for navigating space in general. He's able to find pockets that he can float in to give his teammates passing options or to be in position for a quick decision off of the catch, whether it be a mid-range shot or down under the rim, just going right up or, keeping the ball moving, passing out, whatever it is. Specifically around the dunker spot, he does a really good job of flashing baseline up under the rim or up, into the middle of the floor, kind of between the circles. Off of his team's drives, say Luka or AR or whoever is driving, he's able to find his way into space for a catch on a late dump off pass or to serve as kind of a pseudo screener down low to create space for his teammates. That I think is legitimately one of his biggest strengths offensively, given his skill set, is just his ability to navigate space within the arc. Because when you're a big man who shoots a good amount of mid-range shots on high efficiency and you have the physical tools to finish if you can get the ball under the rim, being able to navigate that space and be in position to make plays allows you to do what you do best. He'll get 8 or 10 or 12 points a game just off of being in a good spot to catch and finish down low, just out of the dunker spot or out of a pick and roll, just because he's so good at navigating that space. And again, that ability to work in space also extends to when he's kind of floating in the middle of the floor around the free throw line or around the nail area, because he's just a quick decision maker in those spots. When the ball comes to him, he can either make those simple kick passes to keep the ball moving, or, he can take those quick mid-range jumpers that he likes if he has the airspace for them. Honestly, I think the biggest limitation to his ability working out of those spots is just how little his teammates actually look for him. I definitely think that the Lakers could benefit from maybe even trying to get him some more touches around the free throw line or around these areas, because I think he has shown that he's efficient and, not going to stop the ball unnecessarily in these spots. So I do think they could benefit from maybe getting him a little more involved and getting him to be, looking a little less lost on offense sometimes. Because his guys aren't really looking for him and he's not getting those design touches a lot of the time, he does just end up sitting around the dunker spot or in the middle of the floor, just kind of watching the game happen around him. It does feel like better than half of the time he's on the floor, half of the offensive possessions he's on the floor, he's just not really doing anything. And I don't know whether that's more of a symptom of his general inactivity as a player or if JJ Redick doesn't just ask him to do anything serious, which it's probably a combination of both. And that's something you'll see on the defensive end when I get to that section as well. He's a pretty solid offensive rebounder out of those spots though as well. His natural ability to find space that I talked about, combined with his just size and strength, allow him to be in position for a good amount of offensive rebounds. He grabs almost 3 offensive rebounds a game, which is 26th out of every player in the league. And he does have an 11.2% offensive rebound percentage, which is 69th percentile. So it's definitely something that he is pretty solid at, even for his position. All right, moving over to the defensive side of Ayton's game, he does play very heavy on the drop coverages, playing as low as possible as he can. Basically every defensive possession, Ayton wants to play as low as possible. He's going under screens, playing a deep drop against those pick and roll and screen actions, unless he's like actively matched up against a shooter or, like on a switch, or, if he's matched up against like a stretch 5, something like that, he does tend to sag off as much as he possibly can get away with, which that I think is almost definitely a JJ Redick thing. I don't think he wants Ayton to have a very complicated job, which isn't an insult or anything. It's just early in the season. They haven't had a ton of time to figure out their scheme, and Ayton at the end of the day is like 7'1", like 270 pounds or something. So they don't want to ask him to move a ton. You know what I'm saying? That being said, though, he is extremely, extremely low activity when he is on the floor. If you look at his block percentage and steal percentage numbers, they are extremely low, and those are 2 of the kind of best activity stats that you can look at. So he doesn't move around. He's not, making plays defensively necessarily. He's kind of just doing his job. Ayton is not necessarily a vertical rim protector in the traditional sense, like a lot of other centers that you would, see in the league, or maybe how you would like him to be, but he is decent at like stepping up, denying those driving lanes, and getting in front if he needs to, if one of his teammates gets blown by and he's low help and whatever, something like that. Like he does offensively, he does have a good feel for space. He's able to step into position a lot of times to shut off those driving lanes before he even has to worry about the rim attempt, but he does over-rely on his positioning a lot of time, which can leave him vulnerable in certain spots. He can be vulnerable to guys shooting over him with like floaters and going off glass and things like that, because he does tend to play defensive situations down low a little softly. Like he'll be playing back with his hand up rather than being physical and up in the offensive player's face. Generally, when someone is driving baseline, or if someone has the ball down low near the rim, he will try to play above the ball, more towards the circles and the free throw line kind of area. He's trying to close off those passing lanes for the ball handler, and that works about as often as it doesn't. Sometimes he does close off those passing lanes, but sometimes the ball handler is able to get underneath him and make a play from there, whether it be scoring or passing the ball. He can definitely block shots out of those situations where he is above the ball, but he's not the type of player that's really going to stand under the rim and challenge vertically if someone is coming downhill at him. Going along with that theme of low movement, low activity, he's not much of a weak side shot blocker or weak side playmaker defensively, though, either. He's very much a traditional strong side big defensively. He doesn't have like the range or the vision to kind of preempt those shots and be a help side shot blocker, kind of like what we saw out of Giannis when he was, in his like defensive prime. He thrives more when guys are funneled into him and he can be in front and cut off those lanes and not have to worry about necessarily protecting the rim. That being said, he is pretty mobile for his size, and he is able to stay in front pretty well on the ball when guys drive at him. He's hard to move off of his spot with that size and strength that he has, and he does swallow up drives pretty well, all things considered, when he has to. When he has to play against stretch bigs, he will switch and play up more in those situations, but that mobility that I'm talking about does actually help him a lot in those situations one-on-one. Going back to what I said before about him playing those drop coverages and going under screens and stuff like that, he will play very low, and he's not going to come up to the level even against like a stretch big or a shooter or whatever in those screen actions, which is something that I think could be improved on if they want to really improve their defense. That is like the biggest thing that I think Ayton can do that he isn't doing right now. And I don't know, again, if that's a him thing or a JJ thing. But I think in the league, the way it is today, you need to be able to step up and effectively kind of pressure those actions if you want to be a high-level defense long-term. And just to speak on his rebounding, he's not the world's best or worst defensive rebounder. He's big and he's strong, so he's able to box out guys, but his box outs aren't necessarily as aggressive or as physical as they could be sometimes. And like I said about how he tries to block shots, he does prefer to stay up and does have a tendency to kind of let guys in underneath along the baseline, which can get him bit for some offensive rebounds sometimes. And now I have to do the inevitable Deandre Ayton effort discourse, which it's a discourse for a reason. The biggest thing that pisses me off when I'm watching Ayton is just how slow to get back on defense he is and just how rarely he is pushing the ball in transition. On offense, he has a tendency to watch the ball or watch the shot go up, and he's not going to get back as often as you would like him to. And on top of that, he's not hustling moving up and down the floor. Like, if you watch a Lakers game and take a shot every time Deandre Ayton is the last guy to come into the frame in transition offensively or defensively, see how long it takes you to black out. I guarantee you won't make it through the first quarter. And then every once in a while, he just will have a game where he just doesn't look like he cares. He looks uninterested. If you look specifically, one of the games that I was watching was his game against the Hawks on November 8th. He just didn't look active at all. He didn't look involved. It looked like the guy at the gym when you're playing at like LA Fitness or whatever who smoked before the game, and he's just out there doing cardio, not really like trying to do anything crazy. His weak screens get weaker. His inactivity defensively gets worse, and his tendency to kind of float and get forgotten about offensively becomes more and more of a problem. But like on the other hand, when he's really seriously dialed in, like in a game against the Spurs, literally 3 days before that Hawks game, he looks like a seriously solid player. He's quick. He's on top of things. He's stepping up more. So a lot of his play really just does come down to his effort level. And again, it's sometimes hard to tell how much of that inactivity comes from his own lack of effort and how much comes from him being told not to do too much. Like I said before, it's probably something of an even split, somewhere in the middle, but both are definitely playing a big role, and he does need to be accountable for his own lack of effort sometimes. So yeah, Deandre Ayton is mid. That's really the conclusion that I've come to. He has some inconsistency that comes with his own inconsistent effort. They don't really ask him to do too much beyond the basics of being a traditional center, and he's honestly not bad at that, but that vanilla usage that he has combined with he doesn't really have any game-breaking offensive skills, and then he's just an average defensive center. He's a solid player, but he's unspectacular. Maybe the 11th or between the 11th and 14th best center in the league when he's really focused. And he can drop down to borderline not starter tier when he is not focused or not trying super hard. That being said, he is on a cheap contract. He is worth every penny that he is paid. He is a warm body at center that is not named Jackson Hayes, so I think the Lakers will take him being mid any day of the week. That's all I've got in this one for you guys. Thank you for watching if you watched all the way through. Remember to like the video and subscribe. Put down in the comments if you have any players or any teams you'd like me to talk about in the future. More videos coming soon. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next one.